Thank you. The Mexican president, Mr. Obrador, said he denied that there were parts of his country under control of cartels. Do you agree with him?
I do not.
Okay.
Mr.
You agree with
Ranking Member.
Secretary Blinken that there are parts of Mexico run by drug cartels?
I do.
Okay. Do you consider Mexico a reliable partner in this fight regarding fentanyl and illegal immigration?
Ranking Member Graham, we are working with Mexico on the fight against fentanyl.
Are they a reliable partner?
We have brought great cases together, and we are looking to enhance our cooperation.
So if we do the things, I'm going to work with Senator Durbin to give you more money at the border to interdict. And let's see how that works. I hope it works. Do you think you have a plan in place that will severely reduce the fentanyl problem in America?
Ranking Member Graham, I think there are two primary elements to the fight against fentanyl. One is the supply, which we are very, very focused on, and I want to touch upon that in a moment. And the second, of course, is the issue of demand, and we need to address both elements of that. We need to also.
I hate to interrupt, but a lot of these poisonings are people are buying what they think to be Percocet or Percodan, and it's got fentanyl all over it.
Absolutely.
They're not demanding fentanyl. They're getting fentanyl-laced drugs that are phony drugs.
Ranking Member Graham, absolutely. And I have heard you speak about the fact that we need severe penalties for the individuals who traffic in fentanyl, and I agree with you.
Okay.
And if I may,
yes, go ahead.
In addition to increasing our work with Mexico, we also have to address the fact that precursor chemicals, as well as the equipment used to manufacture synthetic, dangerous, fatal narcotics, are originating from China.
Okay, that's a good point. Right now, drug cartels are labeled as transnational criminal organizations. Are you aware of that under
Yes,
U.S.
I am.
law? A foreign terrorist organization designation would mean any group, country that supplies material support to an FTO would be subject to American jurisdiction. Do you support labeling these drug cartels as FTOs under U.S. law?
Ranking Member Graham, I have heard you speak of this issue as well. I share your view 100% that these are ruthless, vicious peddlers.
Well, do you support
of
my
death.
efforts to make them FTOs?
This is a decision that rests in the jurisdiction
fair.
of the Department of State, and it is a difficult question as to where the line between criminality, however vicious, and terrorism is drawn. And I'd be happy.
When you kill 70,000 Americans, you have crossed the line. But, you know, that's not your bailiwick. Let's go to your area. You said on April 2022, in a House hearing, you were asked directly, do we have operational control of the southern border right now? Yes or no? You said, yes, we do. Later in that hearing, you said the border was, in fact, not open. About a week or two ago, March 15th, the Border Patrol Chief, Mr. Ortiz, I think, said, when asked, does DHS has operational control of our entire border, he said, no, sir. Do we or don't we?
I'd like to be able to answer that question fully.
Just
Ranking Member
take your time,
Graham,
but not too long, because I don't have much time.
let me be clear. Number one, we are intensely focused on securing the border. Number two, we are equally focused on enforcing our laws to achieve that result. Number three, the Border Patrol agents and all the personnel of the Department of Homeland Security are doing heroic work in that regard. With respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act. And the Secure Fence Act provides statutorily that operational control is defined as preventing all unlawful entries into the United States. By that definition, no administration has ever had operational control. The way I define it is maximizing the resources that we have to deliver the most effective results. And we are indeed doing that. We have, for the first time since 2011, increased the number of Border Patrol agents
Is
that
it
we are
working?
funded.
Is everything you doing working? Is any of it working to stop the poisoning of America or the reduction in a meaningful way of the historic illegal immigration problem? Right now today, do you believe you have a plan that's working?
Ranking Member Graham, I must separate the number of individuals arriving at our border who are claiming relief from the issue of fentanyl that is coming through our ports of entry. That is too often conflated.
No, I agree. I agree.
We are fundamentally, we are working within a system that is absolutely broken, and there is unanimity
Whose
about
problem
that.
is that? Who broke this system that you're trying to fix? I mean,
Congressman,
was it Trump? Is it Trump's problem?
Ranking Member Graham, this is our collective problem,
You've been,
and we need to collectively.
Wait a minute now. You've been DHS Secretary, and I, honest to God, do like you. I think you're a very good man. On your watch, Mr. Secretary, we've gone from the lowest illegal crossings in December 2020 to all-time highs with over 2 million last fiscal year. On your watch, fentanyl is coming in at a pace we've never seen. More Americans are dying. On your watch, more terrorists are coming into the country on the watch list than any time we've been measuring these things. So I'm trying to get some appreciation from you that things are not going well. Your own Border Patrol chief said we don't have operational control of the border, and I don't think it's a definitional problem. I think he's just being really honest with us. So I would like to work with you where I can. You need more money for interdiction, I will work with Senator Durbin to get it to you. But we play around with the problems. We don't address them. Mayor Adams went to the border from New York. He's not exactly a right-wing guy. He said this is a national crisis, and he said basically it's a disaster. Everybody that goes has a different view, Democrats and Republicans. So what I would like to just get from you is some recognition of where we're at, and I don't think where we're going is going to get us to the promised land. You know, I asked you back in the last time we were here to give yourself a grade. You gave yourself an A for effort. How would you grade yourself for outcome since we last met?
Ranking Member Graham, I certainly appreciate and understand the gravity of the challenge that we are facing. It is a very serious challenge. I look forward to working with you with respect to the funding for this department, as well as the hope that we can work together to fix the immigration
I've
system.
got an idea for you. I want you just to entertain it. My time's about up. The credible fear standard is the screening standard when somebody applies for asylum. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. What's the final adjudication standard?
Ranking Member Graham, the credible fear standard is the initial threshold, and it is set by statute as a substantial likelihood of fear of persecution.
So here's my offer. What's the final adjudication standard?
Forgive me, a significant possibility.
Okay.
Persecution.
Okay, here's the final adjudication standard. Reasonable possibility of suffering persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. That's the final adjudication standard. What percentage of people who pass the initial screening standard are given asylum using the second standard?
Ranking Member Graham, if I understand your question correctly, what is the, let's say, average, because it changes by
If you have 100 passing the screening test of critical fear, how many of them are granted asylum through the adjudication process, percentage-wise?
It varies according to country of origin.
I can tell you it's averaging 10%. So 90% of the people that pass the credible fear standard never make it. Here's a proposal. Why don't we make the adjudication standard the initial screening standard? I'm willing to change the law with my Democratic friends. One or two things is happening. You're denying 90% of people with a legitimate claim, which I don't believe, or when you look at their claim, It's not, it's an economic problem. It doesn't meet the statutory definition. If you want to stop asylum seeking, change the standard, because once they get here, they never leave. So I'm willing to work with you. Are you willing to, final question, would you entertain changing the credible fear standard as a screening standard to the final adjudication standard?
Ranking Member Graham, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you to reform.
Great.
What's clearly a broken
Thank you.
immigration system.
That's a good place to start.
Thanks, Senator Graham. Ossoff, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions today, I do want to express my heartbreak at what happened yesterday in Nashville at Covenant School and Covenant Presbyterian Church. And my family and I are grieving along with the rest of the community. And I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your call yesterday, your kind remarks today. And violence against children is just one of the most heinous crimes. And the families there at Covenant Pres and Covenant School, I just grieve for what they're going through. We have to work to protect children at school, and that means increasing security. And I have had legislation that would allow for training and hiring of veterans and former law enforcement officials to serve as school safety officers and to help protect our schools. It is time for us to pass that and to help keep our children safe. I'd like to turn to the questions that are in front of us today. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your patience today. I want to go to this issue of human smuggling. And under this administration, the human smuggling business has gone from being a $500 million a year business to a $13 billion a year industry. And we heard from Secretary Becerra last week at our Senate Finance Committee. And we've got 85,000 unaccompanied alien children, migrant children, who have been released in the U.S. The HHS has lost track of these unaccompanied children. So my question to you is this: how many of these children are being trafficked? How many of these children are being put into the sex trade? What are you doing to try to find these children? And when you look at what is happening to women and children, do you all understand that it is the policies of this administration, what you're doing on the border, that is causing 85,000 children to be lost, can't find them, and not knowing if they're being trafficked, put in gangs, put in the sex trade? So what are you all doing to find these children, and do you understand that it is the policies that is causing this?
Senator, let me share with you what we are doing to address the scourge of human smuggling and human trafficking. And let me say, with respect to the unaccompanied children, and this will echo what I shared with Senator Ossoff just a moment ago. With respect to unaccompanied children, when we receive them at the border, it is our legal obligation to release them to the care of the Department of Health and Human Services within
That's right, and now they cannot find them.
within 72
85,000.
hours. And so what we do is we release
Is that
them.
an acceptable number?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So
But-
what?
So let me share with you. So we release them. One of the reasons why we are devoting our worksite enforcement resources and energies on unscrupulous employers is precisely for the reason that you identify. We must hold accountable employers who engage in
Okay,
child labor.
I appreciate that. Let's look at it.
With
Yeah.
respect to the border,
Yeah, and
we-
let's look at it this way.
two efforts we have underway. One is we are taking it to the smugglers in an unprecedented
They
effort.
haven't gotten that message.
Oh, yes, they have.
I beg to differ, because the situation, it is now a $13 billion a year business. When you go to that border, as I have done, and when you talk to women that have been trafficked and have gotten themselves out and have been raped repeatedly, there is a sexual assault epidemic going on that border. And it is because of the policies of this administration.
Senator.
And it is so.
Senator, it is because of the heinous exploitation of the smuggling organizations.
And what is
that
incentivizing that?
That do not
That's
care.
right. That's exactly right. And you and I agree on that. They do not care about human life. They see people as a product.
Yes, they are.
And a way to make a buck, because they are billion-dollar businesses. They have, and let me turn to the fentanyl epidemic, because we've all talked about this. And I'm hearing from some of my sheriffs now that from a border town sheriff, that fentanyl appeal now is down to about 5 cents, because they've teamed up with the Chinese scientists. They're making these in the labs with the cartels. And I think that you've talked a little bit about the fentanyl today, but you really don't have an estimate of how much is truly coming over that border. And we know that you're saying that they are catching about 95% of that. But what I have heard is what you're giving us is the CBP numbers. You're not giving us the numbers that are coming from air and marine operations. You're not including the Coast Guard. You're not including the DEA, and you're not including what is found by state and local law enforcement. So why won't you look at the holistic number of what everybody is finding?
Oh, Senator, the scourge of fentanyl is something that we do not in any way underestimate. Let me, if I may, share with you. As I mentioned earlier, I served as a federal prosecutor for 12 years.
Yes.
I prosecuted
No,
cocaine.
you're not answering my
Oh, no, if
question,
I
and I've
can.
only got 3 minutes left.
If I can.
Why are you not, why do you not include what everybody is finding? State and local law enforcement, the
But
DEA, the Marine?
We do. Senator, the question that was posed to me was with respect to the southern border and how fentanyl is trafficked into the United States.
Okay, I need to move on, but if you will.
Vast majority of it is brought in through the ports of entry.
No, sir, I beg to differ with that. When you talk to Border Patrol and you talk to local sheriffs, I would like to get from you in writing a total number of what you are finding, not only from CBP, but also from the air and marine operations, the Coast Guard, the DEA, and state and local law enforcement. Let me move on about the gotaways, because we've had over 1.2 million migrants that have evaded authorities and have come into the country illegally. And it is of concern to me when I hear you all try to make illegal legal. There's an app for this, and allowing people to continue to come in illegally. Now, ICE arrested 220 illegal immigrants in 9 days that had criminal convictions of rape and murder. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to go figure out that in those 1.2 million that are unknown gotaways or known gotaways, that number that have disappeared in our country, that you've got murderers and criminals and rapists that are in that number, the gotaways. So how many of those have made it into Tennessee? How many are in our communities? How many are in our streets? Are you all tracking these, or have you lost them like the 85,000 children?
Senator, I would say two things. Number one, we are intensely focused on securing the border, as I have testified earlier, number one. And number two, I think it's very important not to paint with a broad brush individuals who come to the United States.
Well, I
And
think it's
so-
important to note what Border Patrol is telling us. If you're intent on securing the border, then you spend $50 million a year to caretake the items, components from the border wall project that was in the previous administration. The border wall, by the way, the Border Patrol has been asking for a physical barrier for decades. I think about 30 years in total. So instead of wasting that money to do nothing with the construction material, why don't you use those remaining materials and that $50 million and fill in the gaps in this wall so that the Border Patrol has a physical barrier that they need?
Senator, I've approved the vast majority of the projects to close the gaps and complete the gates with respect to the funding that we received.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other question on Chinese nationals that I will submit for a written answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Tillis.
Good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. How's your day going?
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Secretary, when the Attorney General of the United States was here a couple of weeks ago, I asked him whether he was aware of the strategy of transnational criminal organizations to flood the border with migrants in a manner to overwhelm the Border Patrol so that then they could move drugs across the border. And he said he was aware of that strategy. Are you familiar with that strategy? Do you agree with the Attorney General?
I am not aware of that as a strategy. I am certainly aware of the significant challenge.
If you're not aware of the strategy, they move migrants and they move drugs for money, right?
Yes, they do. The cartels
And so
the smuggling.
what better way to move drugs into the United States than to overwhelm the Border Patrol with migrants and divert their attention from their drug interdiction responsibilities?
Senator Cornyn, more than 90% of the fentanyl, or about 90% of the fentanyl that is brought into the United States.
That's a totally made-up number. You had nearly 1 million people get away from Border Patrol, evade Border Patrol's detection and detention between 2022 and 2023. You have no idea how many of those people were carrying fentanyl or other drugs with them, do you?
Senator, the expert view that I received is that approximately 90% of the fentanyl
That's
that is
a totally
brought in,
made-up number, Mr. Secretary, and you
that-
know it. That's a totally made-up number.
Senator, that the expert information that I received is that approximately 90% of the fentanyl is brought in through the ports of entry, through passenger vehicles, through trucks, and through pedestrians.
Mr. Secretary, you understand that you have a credibility problem with the Congress and with the American people, don't you?
I have unflinching confidence in the integrity of my conduct.
No, I'm saying you have told us two patently inconsistent things. For example, you said we do have operational control of the border in 2022. You said the border is not in fact open. And then I think I heard you say here that no administration has ever had operational control of the border. Isn't that what you said?
No. That is not what I said.
That's not what you said. Well, the record will reflect.
May I clarify?
With 4.8 million people coming to the border and being ushered into the interior of the United States, perhaps never to be identified or heard from again, and with 108,000 Americans dying of drug overdoses last year alone, with those drugs flooding across the border, you think everything is just hunky-dory.
That is absolutely not true. Senator,
No,
I understand the gravity
I
of the
understand your
challenge.
answer. You said it's not true, and I disagree with you.
Senator, may
Last month, I went to Hayes Consolidated Independent School District in Kyle, Texas, and I met with Shannon and Darren McConville and Brandon Dunn and Janelle Rodriguez. The McConvilles lost their 17-year-old son, Kevin, to fentanyl poisoning. He had pizza for dinner and then came back down looking for a second helping and none was left, his mom said. So she offered to make him a tuna fish sandwich, and instead he went upstairs and went to bed. And when they went to his bedroom the next morning to wake him up, he was dead because of fentanyl poisoning. Brandon Dunn and Janelle Rodriguez's 15-year-old son, Noah, who loves sports, they called him a genuine, kind, and a jokester. He began, his mental condition began to deteriorate during COVID-19, and unfortunately it had some experience with illicit drugs, but while spending the night at a friend's house during the first weekend of the school year, Noah took a pill laced with fentanyl and died of fentanyl poisoning. Mr. Secretary, would you like to take the opportunity here today to apologize to these parents who lost their children because of fentanyl poisoning because of the policies of your department and the Biden administration? Would you like to apologize to them?
Senator, my heart is with the family of every victim of a drug overdose death.
Is that an apology?
My heart is with the family and the loved ones and the friends and neighbors.
So why don't you do something about it?
Of every victim of these drug overdose deaths.
Attorney General Garland said this is part of a comprehensive strategy by the cartels to flood these drugs into the United States by overwhelming Border Patrol. You're clearly losing that battle, and you won't even apologize to these parents like so many other parents who have lost their teenage children to counterfeit drugs laced with fentanyl.
We are bringing unprecedented force in the fight against
And you're
fentanyl.
losing. Let me ask you another question.
The gravity of the challenge cannot be overstated. We recognize the gravity of the challenge, and I look forward to working with you.
And do you recognize that you were losing?
I look forward to working with you,
No,
Senator,
that's not my question.
and this committee to address this
Let me
challenge
ask you another
together.
question in the time remaining, since you won't answer our questions. And you won't acknowledge responsibility. My constituents are saying, who's accountable? Who's accountable? Who's paying a price? Who got fired? Well, you haven't been fired. You should be fired, but you haven't been fired because you were carrying out the policies of the Biden administration. And we've seen nothing but death and destruction as a result.
Senator,
Will you wait for a question? Wait for a question. I recently went to the Yuma Border Patrol sector, which is a sleepy little agricultural community, as you know, in southwest Arizona. The Border Patrol chief there greeted us by saying, we have encountered 100 migrants from 176 countries speaking 200 languages. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly pointed out that Mexicali is a city in northern Mexico with very close to the border where people can simply fly into that and then take an Uber over to the Border Patrol sector and claim asylum and then be released under your policies, under Biden administration policies, into the interior of the United States from 176 different countries. Recently, I was in El Paso with a bipartisan group of senators that was before we got to Yuma. And we were out on a night patrol. The Border Patrol detained 2 young men who had passports from the People's Republic of China, mainland China, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. They were presumably released like these other individuals into the interior of the United States with either a notice to appear or a notice to report. Can you tell the committee where these people are today? Can you assure us that these individuals are not in the United States to conduct espionage or other nefarious acts against the United States government? Can you reassure us of that?
Senator, if an individual is deemed to present a threat to public safety or national security,
well, how would you know? How would you know? They show up with a passport and they claim a credible fear of persecution, and then under yours and the Biden administration policies, they're released into the interior of the country. These are people who perhaps we don't have any records about. Certainly we're not going to get them from China. You know zero about them, and you know zero about the threat they pose to the United States and our national security. You can't tell us, can you, where the individuals are located who have been either paroled or released into the United States. You have no comprehensive list or ability to identify where those people are today, do you?
Senator, let me again repeat that we screen and vet individuals.
That's not my question.
If we encounter,
you're quite capable of evading the questions we're asking or diverting us to something else that's not what we ask. My question to you is, when somebody from the People's Republic of China shows up in El Paso, Texas, and then claims asylum and is released into the interior of the United States, do you know where they are and what they are up to?
we very well can know where they are based upon.
You can, do you?
It depends on the individual and the fact
So
that
some of them, if it depends on the individual, some of them you don't know where they are or what they are up to. Is that right?
Senator, the issue of individuals absconding from law enforcement is a challenge that
And you were failing in that challenge, Mr. Secretary.
If I may
You and the
finish.
Biden administration policies are contributing to what is happening on the border, and according to Ms. McConville, she credited the Biden broken border policies with contributing to the death of her son, and you won't even have the common decency to apologize.
Senator, as I mentioned before, and I must say this, that my heart is with the victims of every death from an overdose, number one. Number two, we are bringing unprecedented force to the fight against the drug traffickers. Number three, the scourge of fentanyl is not new. It is not something that was born in 2021. And I can provide you with the tens of thousands of deaths that preceded this administration. This is a challenge that we all have to come together to fight.
He's simply lost all credibility, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Booker?
Mr. Secretary, our southern border is not secure, is it?
Senator, I have spoken about this. I believe I've addressed this earlier in the hearing.
Why don't you address it again?
Of course. Let me share with you a few things. Number one, when I speak of the security of the border, I am speaking of maximizing the resources we have to deliver the most effective results.
So
and let me assure you that we are
it's
doing
secure
so.
because we're trying to secure it. Are we succeeding?
Senator, we are so focused on the security of our southern border. We are doing so much with
But you're
respect
not
to
succeeding.
the surge of personnel.
How you're not succeeding?
Oh, Senator, let me share with you that the challenge of migration that we are experiencing at our southern border is not exclusive to the United States. It is something that is gripping the entire hemisphere.
But my job is to worry about the United States.
As
Mr.
is
Chairman.
mine. As is mine.
And here's my question. Let me try to rephrase it. And I really do wish, I understand the position you're in, but you really should try to do a better job of answering the questions. Under the Biden administration, we have the most encounters, we have had the most encounters with people attempting to come into our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most people entering our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most gotaways at our southern border in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most number of people entering our country under a claim of asylum, having that claim turned down and still not being deported in the history of ever. And under the Biden administration, we've had the most fentanyl coming into our country in the history of ever. How can you possibly say the southern border is secure.
Do you know
I
that-
understand your answer that you're trying, but I'm not asking about your efforts. I'm asking about the results.
Well, let's talk about the results then, Senator. Do you know that last year we expelled and removed approximately 1.4 million people from the southern border? I believe that's the most ever. Do you realize that we are focused on enforcing our laws to achieve the security of the southern border?
I
That
know you're
people-
focused, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Secretary, but you're not succeeding.
Senator,
And when you come testify to us, you talk about how you're trying really hard. And I don't have any way to disprove that. I accept that statement in good faith. But the numbers belie that.
If I can, Senator, let me give you an example of a solution that we have delivered that for some reason is being contested. Because it's
Mr.
caused the
Secretary, I
95.
give you 30 seconds,
It's-
okay?
it's caused the 95
Don't filibuster me.
It's
You've
caused-
been doing that all day. I'm just trying to ask
I'm just
you
trying to
questions.
communicate. It has led to approximately 95% drop in the number of encounters in between the ports of entry at our southern border of Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans.
Mr. Secretary,
on January 5th.
Mr.
And why would that
Secretary.
be opposed when it is delivering precisely the result that you seek?
Did you just parachute in from another planet, Mr. Secretary? Because you're the only person in the Milky Way who believes that we're not having massive illegal immigration into America.
Senator, you're putting words into my mouth.
No, sir,
There is-
I'm
there is-
accurately describing the
There is
situation.
no question, that we have a very serious challenge at our southern border.
Okay,
It
let
is
me-
a
let me-
challenge
Well,
that is
we can agree on that one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair. I'm glad to see us returning on the Appropriations Committee to what I'll call quasi-regular order, where our subcommittees are meeting and talking about the matters within our jurisdiction. And I think we should return to full regular order. I think whether we return to full regular order will depend on Senator Schumer. I'm not convinced yet that he will allow us to return to full regular order. I'm not convinced yet that he will give up his power to basically write the budget, he and a few other leaders. And I'm not convinced, well, I don't want to necessarily ascribe this to Chuck. Many people like an omnibus because they can hide the spending and because they have enough internal power to get what they want. And for everybody else, it's too bad. So I hope that we'll all encourage Senator Schumer to actually bring the bills to the floor, because that's going to be the true test. We can all meet and ask all these questions and pour over budgets that never have a chance to pass. It's going to depend on Senator Schumer, and that's kind of the bottom line. Mr. Secretary, yesterday, you testified in judiciary that you support an assault weapon ban, and we didn't have much time to talk about that. Tell me your definition once more of an assault weapon.
Senator, we did indeed have a brief exchange on that very important subject. I am not an expert
Right.
with respect to the definition of the assault bans, and so I defer.
You are the Secretary of Homeland Security.
As I was about to say, I defer to the experts. I defer to, for example, the definition of an assault weapon that was codified in the prior iteration of the legislation that was passed, and that was in operation when I served as an assistant United States attorney and the United States attorney in the Central District of California.
So you would support the prior definition under?
Senator, I must defer to the experts with respect to the definition, but I will tell you, for example, military-style weapons are of tremendous concern. We are seeing too much devastation.
How do you define, but I mean, you personally think we should ban assault weapons, and I know you to be an intelligent man and a thinking person, so I know you've thought about it. What is it about a military, what do you mean by a military-style weapon?
Senator, I really must say that you are probing a very, very important area, definitionally, in which I do not have the requisite expertise. I will say this. When we see the tragedy in Nashville, and it is not the first such tragedy that we see, when I engage with my international counterparts and they ask me almost invariably first, what is going on with all the mass killings in the United States, and why are these assault weapons disseminated so broadly? I say that we need legislation to ban.
Let me follow up on that. So you support an assault weapon ban, but you don't have a definition. Is that right?
Senator, I think that you understand where I stand.
No, I don't. You made a very bold statement, very firmly saying we should ban all assault weapons. And all I'm asking is, what, in your mind, is an assault weapon? I mean, you say it's military style. Does that mean it looks like a military weapon?
Senator, I believe I've addressed your question.
I mean, what if it's a single-shot .22 that looks like a military weapon? Would you ban that because it's scary looking to you?
Senator, I think I've addressed your question to the best of my abilities.
But you haven't. I mean, I'm trying to understand. You're Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and as is your right, as an American, you believe we should ban assault weapons. But it bothers me, you can't tell me what you would ban.
Senator, I would be very pleased to speak with experts and confer with you subsequent to today's hearing and share with you a proposed definition that could be inserted into the legislation that is so desperately needed. Because I will tell you, the way I look at it is I
Mr.
see
Secretary,
so much tragedy.
what if Senator Tester, my good friend, he's not here, what if Senator Tester said to you, I oppose illegal immigration, which I think he does, and you said to him, what do you mean by illegal immigration? And he said, well, I don't know, but I oppose it. You wouldn't accept that answer, and that's the answer you've given me. You said you want to oppose all assault weapons, but you don't know what they are. Can you give me an example?
Senator, I think I gave you an example yesterday, so I'm not exactly sure why you're posing
Which
the
one?
question.
Refresh my memory of the example.
I believe I said an AK-47.
Well, what is it about an AK-47 that you find to be objectionable? Is it the fact that it has a magazine?
Senator,
Do you know what a magazine is?
Senator,
But first, do you know what a magazine is, Mr. Secretary?
yes, I do. And Senator, what I've come to do is testify to this committee and not take an examination with respect to questions that I've already answered to the best of my ability. And so I think it is self-evident why an AK-47 should be banned, as just one example. But I look forward to conferring with you.
Except you can't
subsequently.
explain what one is.
I think, Senator, that
Senator's time has expired.
Senator, we've seen enough tragedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hessen. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Good morning.
Didn't bring my chart, it's just too depressing to look at, of apprehensions on the border. It's abject failure. But I'm hoping that you came a little bit better prepared in terms of going through the numbers with me. And I guess rather than ask you for the numbers, which I've never gotten straight answers on, let me just run by you the numbers that we've got off of, many times right off your website. Total nationwide encounters during the Biden administration, just shy of 6 million. Is that about right?
My understanding of apprehensions is that is almost 6 million, yes.
So again, you're calling them encounters now, which I think is a strange turn of a phrase.
Well, the reason...
Total expulsions on, well, I know, because you're not apprehending them. You're just encountering and then you're dispersing and processing and dispersing them. Total expulsions under Title 42, about 2.4 million. So that means 6 million minus 2.4, about 3.6 million people have been encountered, very efficiently processed and dispersed, correct? About 3.6 million?
So there are other ways that individuals are addressed, Senator Johnson. For example, they can be removed under Title 8 of the United States Code.
So how many have been removed under that title then?
In fiscal year 2022, I record just over 360,000 individuals have been removed under Title 8. There are also, Senator, there's also the ability to have individuals voluntarily return to their country of origin.
So how many is that number? How many voluntarily returned?
My understanding of the data in fiscal year 2022, it was approximately 260,000 individuals.
So I'll take 500,000 off of that, okay? So 3.6 down, take 500,000 away from that, it's about 3.1. According to Border Patrol Chief Ortiz, about 1.4 million known gotaways. I mean, is that a correct number, 1.4?
Last year, Senator, and by the way, if I may, you combined multi-year figures with the data that I provided, which was for 1 year.
That's because you don't publish this stuff in a very understandable way. So a large number of people are getting away that we know about. We don't know who these people are, but they're just gotaways. They're never encountered. They get away into the interior. Then we've got one estimate's about 0.3 million unknown gotaways. Okay, that's the estimate. So somewhere north of 4 million people. I had a number down here, 5.3, but we're adjusting that down based on Title II expulsions and I guess people voluntarily going home. Somewhere between 4 and 5 million people during this administration have been coming to this country, probably don't qualify for asylum, but that's a pretty accurate number, right? 4 to 5 million?
Senator, let me first communicate a premise, which is we are very, very focused on the security of our border.
No, you're not. No, you're not. I don't want to listen to that. So basically what we're looking at is 22 states have populations less than 4 million people. 28 states have populations less than 5 million people. That is the magnitude of the problem. Do you know how many dead bodies were discovered on the southwest border in fiscal year 2022?
Senator, when you...
listen, I don't have much time. Do you know how many dead bodies were discovered?
Senator, this is precisely why we are seeking to
do you know?
Make sure...
I'm not looking for a, do you know how many dead bodies were discovered in 2022? What's the number?
Senator?
It's, it's 890, according to a news article in the Wall Street Journal, which I'd like to enter in the record. I'd also like to, can you enter that in the record? Well, without objection. Thank you. I'd also like to enter into the record a couple of New York Times articles, oddly enough, written by Hannah Dreyer. This one is published on February 25th, 2023. It's titled, "Alone and Exploited, Migrant Children Work Brutal Jobs Across the U.S." I just want to quote from this article, "But as more and more children have arrived, the Biden White House has ramped up demands on staffers to move children quickly out of the shelters and release them to adults. Caseworkers say they rush through the vetting process. It goes on, data obtained by the Times show that over the last 2 years, the agency could not reach more than 85,000 children. Overall, the agency lost immediate contact with about a third of the migrant children. It goes on. It's going to be a business for some of these co-sponsors, said one of the people trying to place these folks, one of the caseworkers. But the caseworkers at those agencies said the HHS regularly ignored obvious signs of labor exploitation. In interviews with more than 60 caseworkers, most independently estimate that about 2/3 of all unaccompanied children end up working full-time. It goes on, as the government, we've turned a blind eye toward their trafficking, says Doug Gilmer, the head of Birmingham, Alabama Office of Homeland Security Investigations, a federal agency that often becomes involved with immigrant cases. Mr. Gilmore teared up as he recalled finding 13-year-olds working in meat plants, 12-year-olds working at suppliers for Hyundai and Kia, and children who should have been in middle school working at commercial bakeries. Mr. Secretary, do you know how many young girls are sex trafficked? Are you following any of those cases? Do you have HSI investigating that form of involuntary servitude because of your open border policies?
Senator, our Center for Combating Human Trafficking presents one of our greatest priorities within the Department of Homeland Security. It is precisely why I've taken two important steps. Number one, identify for the first time human trafficking and child exploitation as a priority for the Department of Homeland Security. Number two,
but you are failing miserably. 4 to 5 million people, 1.4 million unknown gotaways. We have no idea who those people are, what kind of security they risk. You're not giving me any stats whatsoever in terms of the number of people that are human trafficked, how many young girls are sex trafficked. You don't have a clue. You wouldn't even answer how many dead bodies, which is very well documented, at the border. Do you not care? Do you not have just an ounce of human compassion for what your open border policy, the type of human depredations it is causing? You just sit there looking with a blank look on your face. And you're saying it's a priority. If it's a priority, how did we let 4 to 5 million people in this country in a little more than 2 years? 4 to 5 million people. The population of 20 to almost 30 states. And you're saying this is a priority? Mr. Secretary, you ought to resign.
Senator Johnson, Secretary, sorry, I'd like you to respond to.
Well, I have a number of responses. The senator mischaracterizes our policies with respect to the security of the southern border. The senator, of course, disparagingly mischaracterizes our commitment to address human trafficking and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals, including children. And the senator misstates the data because he confuses encounters with unique individuals. But a number of things I'd have to say in addition to the senator's statements, and I would look forward to doing so, Senator Johnson, subsequent to this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. Let's talk about the surge in child smuggling and child exploitation that is happening on your watch. Do you know the number of unaccompanied children who have come across the border on your watch?
Senator, I don't have that number at my disposal, but I can assure you that we are incredibly dedicated to the safety and security of those children.
Well, it doesn't appear so based on what we're reading today in the New York Times, what we're reading and seeing from numbers from your own office. The answer to my question, by the way, is 345,807. That's the number of unaccompanied children who have come across the border on your watch. Do you know what's happening to these children? Have you seen this report from the New York Times? Alone and exploited migrant children work brutal jobs across the United States. Have you seen this?
Senator, I have, and let me share with you what we are doing.
Have you seen these numbers? These are reports of trafficking and abuse of migrant children. You can see a massive surge that begins to happen when? Oh, when you come to office in 2021. Huge surge, reports of trafficking, reports of neglect and abuse. Let's just look at a few of the details. This is absolutely unbelievable. I can't believe this happens in the United States of America in this day and age. This is from the New York Times. Thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machinery in factories, all in violation of child labor laws. For example, there's a young girl named Carolina from Guatemala. She is 15 years old. What does she do? She packages Cheerios overnight at a factory. She says, sometimes I get tired and I feel sick. The times goes on, her stomach often hurt. She was unsure if that was because of a lack of sleep or the stress of the incessant roar of the machines or her own worry. The times goes on. Far from home, many of these children are under intense pressure to earn money. They have to send cash back home to their families while often being in debt to their sponsors, quote unquote. For what? For smuggling fees, rent, and living expenses. One individual interviewed by the Times said this, I'm still quoting, "It's the new child labor. You're taking children from another country and putting them into indentured servitude." I could go on and on. The Times details over a multi-month investigation, kid after kid, child after child. One 13-year-old forced to wash hotel sheets in Virginia. Kids running milking machines in Vermont, delivering meals in New York City, scrubbing dishes late at night, all in violation of our country's laws, all facilitated by your policies. Are you proud of this record?
Senator, the horrific exploitation of children is something that we do not condone. You are incorrectly attributing it to our policies. Let me share with you.
Wait a minute. It began, look at the numbers, It began, this massive surge began when you came to office. In your first year in office, there was a 342% surge of unaccompanied children across the border. You know, CBS reported that, I'm going to quote them now, Mr. Biden's election, as well as policy changes announced by his administration, those would be your changes, led smugglers to tell migrant youth they had a better chance of being allowed to stay in the United States than they had under Trump. Meanwhile, you've lost track of tens of thousands of them. The Times also reviewed data that showed the government couldn't reach more than 85,000 of these children who they just turned over into the hands of smugglers, these are modern day slave traders. And you're just giving these children to them. What is going on? Why are you doing this?
Senator, so of course there are a number of factual inaccuracies in your question, but let me address two lines of effort that we have to combat the scourge of exploitation.
Why don't we just start with why you enabled it? Can we just start with that? Why is it that you have enabled 345,000 children to be smuggled across this border and then sent into the hands of modern-day slave traders? In 2021, you made the decision to change Title 42 to allow unaccompanied children to come into the United States and then to be sent into the interior of the country. Under the last administration, children were reunited with their families in their home country. You changed that, and as soon as you changed it, the numbers exploded. That is your responsibility.
Quite a number of false statements, Senator.
What is false about that statement?
So if I can state what I've been trying to state, one of the significant policy decisions that we have made is to focus our worksite enforcement investigative efforts, our criminal investigative efforts on unscrupulous employers that exploit individuals because of their vulnerabilities, and that includes underage workers.
That is not what the New York Times investigation found. Mr. Chairman, I just ask at this point, I'd like to enter into the record the New York Times article, "As Migrant Children Were Put to Work, U.S. Ignored Warnings." This is from April 17th, 2023. This is this morning. And I'd also like to enter into the record the New York Times article, "Alone and Exploited Migrant Children Work Brutal Jobs Across the U.S." This is from February 25th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What these articles show, Mr. Secretary, is that the administration has done nothing but facilitate this crisis. You changed Title 42. You allowed hundreds of thousands of migrant children to come across the border, and then you made it worse. When they became a political crisis for you, when that huge surge of kids across the border because you changed Title 42, when it became an optics crisis, what did you do? You began pressuring officials and agencies to skip the vetting process and get these kids out as soon as possible to sponsors who weren't vetted. Here's the Times again. "As shelters filled with children, The administration began loosening vetting restrictions and urging case managers to speed the process along. You have at every stage facilitated this modern-day indentured servitude of minor children. Why should you not be impeached for this?
Senator, I look forward to discussing this issue further because you are misstating the facts so terribly.
I am reading you the facts from articles in the news, and your usual modus operandi is what you're doing again today, was just to deny, deny, deny. Why have you permitted 345,000 children to come into this country unaccompanied? Why have you permitted thousands of them to be abused and exploited?
Senator, what we do is we enforce the law. But let me just say this.
You're not.
It is stunning to me, stunning, to hear you say that the prior administration reunited children with their parents.
Oh, I see.
When
So
in
this
fact-
is their fault?
When in
So
fact,
but you're not going to take any responsibility for the indentured servitude and exploitation of children that is happening on your watch. A moment ago, you were crowing about the fact that you treated children so well, and yet we find tens of thousands of children who are forced to work as slaves because of your policies, and you turn around and blame a prior administration. Mr. Secretary, this is par for the course for you. You do it every time you appear before this committee. You do it every time you appear before Congress. I, for one, am sick and tired of it, and thousands of children are in physical danger because of what you are doing. You should have resigned long ago, and if you cannot change course, you should be removed from office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Marshall, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, approximately how many illegal aliens in this country or here on asylum have direct ties to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Islamic Jihad, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran?
Senator Marshall, let me assure you that individuals that pose a risk to our national security are our highest enforcement priority. The safety and security of the American public.
Do you have any idea how
is
many
our
numbers,
highest
what
mission.
those numbers are? Is it tens, is it hundreds, is it thousands?
An individual who poses a risk to our national security is our highest enforcement priority, and if detention...
So you don't know the answer to the question?
And if detention is indeed warranted by reason of the risk they present, then we indeed detain them.
Do you have an answer for my question?
I believe I have answered your question.
No, sir, you didn't. I asked you how many have direct ties to Hamas, Hezbollah, Islam Jihad.
Senator, if an individual is identified as having a nexus to one of those organizations, we would consider them a risk to our national security and take appropriate enforcement action to include, for example, detention and removal.
So let's back up. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
Yep. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
If you are referring, Senator, to the terrorist screening data set, just to be precise, I would be pleased to speak with you in the appropriate context. This would not be it.
How many gotaways did CBP record in fiscal year 2023?
I believe, Senator, that number is over 600,000, and as I'm sure you are well aware, the phenomenon of gotaways is something that has been a challenge for the Department of Homeland Security for decades. In fact, it is a powerful example of a broken immigration system.
Thank you. I want to talk about Chinese nationals for a second. Would you agree with me that over 18,000 Chinese nationals, many are military-aged young men, have illegally crossed the southern border in fiscal year 2023?
Senator, I don't have the precise number, but as I said, individuals who are encountered are placed into immigration enforcement proceedings, and if they qualify for asylum...
With all due respect, you would agree with me it's over 18,000, though?
I do not have the number at my disposal.
Do you know where the Chinese nationals are settling, where they're working, why they're here? How do you follow them?
Senator, if an individual has fled China and seeks asylum and qualifies for asylum, for example, if they fear persecution
I understand
by
that.
reason of their membership in a particular social group.
How do you follow
And
them?
there
That's not
is-
my question. How do you follow them? Do you have a heightened concern for these people?
So, Senator, if an individual poses a risk to public safety or national security, they are deemed a priority and can be placed in detention if the facts so warrant. If indeed we determine in the exercise of our law enforcement discretion that detention is not required because they do not present.
We
that
understand,
risk-
we all understand all that, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. I want to go back to gotaways. I'm sure you'll agree with me that under Mr. Biden, that at least 1.7 million gotaways have evaded apprehension at our border. How many of these known gotaways have convictions in their prior country for rape or murder? How many of these known gotaways have been prosecuted and deported?
3 points, Senator. Number one, as I articulated earlier in this hearing, we are seeing a number of displaced individuals throughout our hemisphere that is unprecedented. Number one. Number two, we are dealing with a broken immigration system. Number three.
But you're not going to answer my question.
Number three, if an individual.
How many of these known gotaways have committed crimes in the United States since you were sworn in?
Let me assure you that if an individual poses a risk to public safety pursuant to the enforcement guidelines.
But you have no
that
ability
I-
to measure that?
Pursuant to the enforcement guidelines that I promulgated on September 30th of 2021, the individual is.
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
The individual is an enforcement priority.
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
Senator, we well know that the trafficking of fentanyl is not specific to a nationality. Tragically, we have individuals from various countries of origin. We have American citizens trafficking in fentanyl. Fentanyl is a scourge that we must all work together to overcome.
Okay, let's talk about the 169 individuals encountered on the terror watch list between the ports of entry in fiscal year 2023. How many were deported? How many are jailed? How many are still in the country?
Senator, with respect to the individuals on the terrorist screening data set, I would be pleased to provide you with the numbers in the appropriate context.
Of the over 75,000 special interest aliens who crossed our border illegally this fiscal year, what are their whereabouts? How are you tracking these people?
We have a number of ways of tracking them, Senator. If, in fact, they present a national security or public safety threat, we very well may detain them. If we do not believe that detention is appropriate, we have alternatives to detention. It's known by its acronym ATD, and we have various levels of supervision depending on the enforcement profile that the individual presents.
Okay. The folks back home, when they look at the evidence, they see that the DEA seized over 380 million doses of fentanyl in 2022. 73,000 Americans died from fentanyl poisoning in 2022, mostly young adults, school-aged children, and that 90% of the fentanyl comes from our southern border. You know, considering that just last month, our Border Patrol had almost 270,000 encounters, including 75,000 special interest aliens. Do Americans feel they're more safe today or less safe today under the policies of this administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels, to the traffickers of fentanyl in an unprecedented way, with more resources and more efficient and productive operations than ever before.
But you would agree with me that Americans feel less safe today than they did before the start of this administration, and your testimony has always solidified the view that American people, that they don't have confidence in the job that you're doing. This is why I believe the defining issue in this next election is going to be exactly this. Are our families safer today than they were 3 years ago? Thank you. I yield back.
Secretary Mayorkas, is DHS still meeting with social media companies to discuss content moderation?
Ranking Member Paul, you and I have discussed this before. We do not meet with social media companies for the purpose of instructing them to take down content.
You have never had any meetings with the social media companies to discuss content moderation?
What we have done in the past, Ranking Member Paul, as I shared with you previously, is we, along with other federal agencies, have met with social media companies in a public-private partnership to speak of the threats to the homeland so that those companies are alert to them.
Do you
We
think
do
a
not
threat? Do
instruct
you think
them.
a threat to the homeland is a discussion of vaccine efficacy?
I do not, Ranking Member Paul, and I should say.
If you'll have your staff read, and I think it'd be good for you to read also the Missouri versus Biden case, it lists time and time again discussion of constitutionally protected speech that has nothing to do with national security. So when you say you didn't meet to do with that, yes, you were meeting, you just disagree with the characterization of it. Were you meeting with social media companies to discuss content moderation? And your answer to that is no?
My answer
That's
is
the specific question. Did you meet with them, and were you meeting with them to discuss content on the internet?
My answer remains the same, Ranking Member Paul, that we met on a periodic basis with other federal agencies and a group of social media companies to speak with them about the threat environment that the homeland faced.
Right, and this include discussion of vaccine efficacy, mask efficacy, Hunter Biden's laptop. Are these meetings still occurring?
Ranking Member Paul, they are not. We do not participate in any such
And
meeting.
the reason the meetings aren't occurring is because a federal judge placed an injunction on you, and the Biden administration acknowledged that they're not having the meetings. So you need at least acknowledge that the court is talking to you about this and saying what you were doing was violating the First Amendment.
But let me ask you something else. Let me ask you about people who say other things. What about people who say things like, on October the 7th, F Israel, I'm cleaning up the language here, F Israel, the government and its military, are you ready for your downfall? People who say things like F Israel and any Jew who supports Israel. May your conscience haunt your dreams until your last breath. Palestine will be free one day. F apartheid Israel and is any Israeli. This is pretty extreme rhetoric, don't you think?
Senator, I do, and I think there is a distinction between espousing or endorsing terrorist ideology and speech that is odious, that does not rise to that level.
Fair enough. This person works for you. This is Nuja Ali, an employee of the Department of Homeland Security, who posted these comments on October the 7th. That's not all she posted. She also posted this graphic. Now, this is a fake graphic, I want to be clear, but I think we understand it. This is a paraglider, a Hamas paraglider, depicted here with a machine gun flying into Israel. She posted it under her online alias with the celebratory Free Palestine. Mr. Secretary, what's going on here? Is this typical of people who work at DHS? This is an asylum and immigration officer who is posting these, frankly, pro-genocidal slogans and images on the day that Israelis are being slaughtered in their beds. What have you done about this?
4 things I'd like to say to you. Number one, your question to suggest that that is emblematic of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security is despicable.
I'm sorry, what have you done? This person works for the Department of Homeland Security. Have you fired her?
That was one of 4 answers.
Have you fired her?
One.
Have you fired her? Don't come to this hearing room when Israel has been invaded and Jewish students are barricaded in libraries in this country and cannot be escorted out because they are threatened for their lives. You have employees who are celebrating genocide, and you are saying it's despicable for me to ask the question? Has she been fired?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary.
After the consumption of Senator Hawley's time, I'd like to speak.
Has she been fired?
Because I will
We
not
would like
be,
an answer. Would you?
because I will not be given the opportunity.
Has she been fired?
So that individual has been placed on administrative leave.
So she's not been fired.
Number two.
Why has she not been fired?
Number two, the individual was hired in 2019.
Why has she not been fired?
Number three, I cannot speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
Why has this person not been fired? Your answer is you can't speak to it? This isn't sufficient to fire her?
I am not in a position to speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
This
That-
isn't sufficient to fire her? That's what you're telling me?
That is not what I'm saying.
But she's still on your payroll as we sit here today.
That is not what I'm saying.
She's still on your payroll as we sit here today.
Senator,
How many cases? She was an asylum and immigration officer. How many cases did she adjudicate?
Senator, I'm not in a position to speak about an ongoing personnel.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking you how many cases she adjudicated.
My answer remains.
Did she adjudicate any cases involving Israelis seeking asylum in this country?
Same answer.
Well, let me just point you to what else she posted on social media, where she drew attention to the fact that she is an immigration and asylum officer. Hashtag immigrants, hashtag asylum seekers, hashtag Palestine, hashtag refugees welcome. This is on her LinkedIn post where she has her professional affiliation posted. So I think the American people deserve to know, has she admitted, contrary to law, individuals who should not be in this country or denied Jewish refugees whose genocide she's advocating, asylum that they deserve?
Same answer.
You're not gonna tell us what this person's done? Are you conducting a review of her cases at least?
Senator, as I have said over and over again, I cannot speak to an ongoing
You said that you will
personnel
not. I
matter.
can't believe that you would come to this committee knowing this. You know about this. I've written to you about it. You know all about it. And you come here unwilling to answer and suggest that it is wrong of me to ask you the question. Quite frankly, Mr. Secretary, I think that your performance is despicable. And I think the fact that you are not willing to provide answers to this committee is absolutely atrocious.
The Church Committee issued its final report, revealing decades of widespread abuse by federal intelligence agencies against U.S. citizens. The Bipartisan Church Committee outlined countless examples of how the federal government used powers that were meant to counter foreign threats against its own citizens. In an effort to protect society, these abuses happened under presidents of both parties. Domestic groups like the NAACP and the Women's Liberation Group engaged in nonviolent, lawful political expression were targeted and surveilled for contradicting the approved government initiative and narrative. Intelligence agencies use their powers to serve ideological purposes, attempting to covertly influence social policy and political action. The government distorted and exaggerated facts, leveraged mass media, and attacked the leadership of groups it considered to be threats to the social order. One of these so-called threats to social order was Martin Luther King, Jr. The purpose of the Church Committee's years-long investigation was to expose the intelligence agency's unlawful overreach into the private lives of Americans. The committee hoped that its findings would result in more transparency and accountability to ensure that these abuses never occurred again. They say history repeats itself, doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Unfortunately, as we sit here today, I fear that our federal government is still undertaking many of the same tactics that the Church Committee found to be unworthy of democracy and occasionally reminiscent of totalitarian regimes. Federal agencies, including the FBI and the DHS, continue to operate in a manner that is outside the scope of their authorities, wasting taxpayer dollars and infringing on the rights of Americans. Earlier this month, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals found that the federal agencies, including the FBI and DHS, likely violated the First Amendment. In fact, the judge said it was one of the worst, if not the worst, violation of the First Amendment in the history, in American history. By coercing social media companies to remove speech the government disagreed with related to the origins of COVID-19, pandemic lockdowns, vaccine efficacy, and the Hunter Biden laptop stories. FBI and DHS regularly met with social media companies and pressured them to remove content it deemed as misinformation, including posts and accounts that originated from within the United States and including posts and accounts that are verifiably true. And the censorship of the constitutionally protected speech on social media is just one example of the executive branch actions in recent years weaponizing the federal government against its people. The FBI continues to misuse its authority under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. You would think we'd be going after foreigners, but we are using the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to go after Americans, as we observed and was done with individuals participating in the George Floyd protests. unconstitutional access to Americans' activities was instituted against those in the George Floyd protests. DHS warned of violence from Americans who questioned the efficacy and safety of the COVID-19 vaccines and protested government overreach associated with pandemic mitigation measures. These agencies, charged with protecting the security of our nation, targeted parents who protested restrictive COVID-19 policies at school board meetings and labeled Catholics as potential domestic terrorists. It is hardly a surprise that the faith of Americans in their government is dwindling. Instead of focusing on rampant violent crime across the nation and the unprecedented crisis at the border, FBI and DHS are using their resources to surveil and censor law-abiding Americans engaged in constitutionally protected speech. When the federal government's activities are improperly focused inward, legitimate national security threats go unnoticed. The Church Committee highlighted the important point, highlighting that the FBI placed more emphasis on domestic dissent than on organized crime. And its effort to combat foreign spies suffered because of its focus on American protest groups. The narratives from the past and the present draw a concerning parallel. The lessons of the Church Committee report resonate nearly 50 years later, yet the cycle of executive branch overreach continues. The American people deserve accountability from the federal government, and Congress cannot continue to abdicate its constitutional duty to conduct oversight. As the Church Committee aptly pointed out, power must be checked and balanced, and the preservation of liberty requires the restraint of laws. It is our responsibility to ensure that the principles of American democracy endure, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will work with me to do just that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. Secretary Mayorkas, since President Biden has been president and since you have been secretary, how many members of Hamas have come into our country across the southern border?
Senator, I'm not aware of a member of Hamas crossing the border.
Have you stopped a member of Hamas from coming in?
Senator, I am not aware of a member of Hamas being encountered at our southern border.
Have you vetted all of the people who have, all of the 8.4 million people who have come into our country illegally?
Senator, you and I have spoken about this before. As you know, we screen and vet individuals.
Have you vetted all of them?
Senator, as you know, we screen and vet individuals whom we encounter.
You haven't vetted all of them, have you?
Senator, as I said, we screen and vet individuals whom we encounter at our border.
All right, I want to move on because, with respect, Mr. Secretary, to quote a public official in my state, it takes you an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes, and you try to filibuster us and use up our time. What is a safe third country policy?
Senator, a safe third country policy is a policy that provides as follows, that when an individual is fleeing their country of origin by reason of fear of persecution, and they traverse another country that can provide them safety from that fear, then they may not qualify for humanitarian relief in their ultimate country of destination because they have
Let me stop you because you're watching 60 Minutes again.
Well, it's Senator.
A safe third country policy, you can tell me if I misunderstand this. Safe third country policy says America has joined the UN treaty that says if you're being persecuted politically or for race or for religion in your own country, you can seek asylum in the United States. But this is the safe third country part. You have to seek that asylum in the first safe third country that you enter. Is that basically correct?
Of the safe third country policy? Are you asking me, is that a correct
Yes, I am.
assessment? Yes, but let me also
Okay,
just.
let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Safe third country policies have been around for over 40 years, haven't they?
I don't know,
They started in the 1980s in of all places, Scandinavia, didn't they?
I don't know, Senator.
And the UK has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, the UK is underway in addressing its immigration challenges.
Spain has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, if you know the answer to the question, I'm not sure why you're posing it to me.
Greece has a safe third country policy, doesn't it? Because I want to know if you know. You don't even know how many people are coming into our country.
That is not
Greece
true.
has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, I disagree with the statement that you...
Understand, but does Greece have a safe third country policy?
I do not know if it does.
Canada, the EU, Turkey, Norway, they all have safe third country policies, don't they?
It's interesting you cite Canada because I negotiated the safe third country agreement.
And the first thing that President Biden did, and you did, when you took office, was abolish our safe third country policies. Now, in 2023, this is Senator Hovind's chart. What percentage of the illegal immigrants who came across the southern border were not from Mexico? Do you know?
Senator, I know that third country nationals has been on the increase, the number of encounters.
What percentage?
I can certainly.
You don't know, do you?
I can
Okay.
certainly.
It's 71%, okay, are not people who are not from Mexico. So if we had a safe third country policy, that means that 71% of the 8.4 million people that if you have allowed to come into our country illegally, let me be conservative and use 6.6 million because the 8.4 includes gotaways. 71% of the 6.6 million people that you have allowed into our country illegally would not be hurt in any way. They could claim asylum from political or religious or racial persecution, but they would have to do it in another country, more than likely Mexico. Is that not the case?
Senator, that is an incomplete and inaccurate accounting of the safe third country.
And did you not say, when we last spoke, and I proposed that, you thought it was a bad policy?
Senator, let me share with you a prerequisite to a safe third country agreement, and that is...
No, I'm almost out of time, and I'm not going to let you filibuster, Mr. Secretary.
Well, Senator, I have to say that 60 minutes...
Well, I'm just not going to let you do
Senator
it.
Kennedy, if he can respond, you're out of time, but I'd like to.
It's my time, Madam Chair, and I'm going to use it the way I want.
Your time is expired.
Well, you let others go on. Here's what I think, Mr. Secretary. I think you're a smart guy. Now, there are only one or two things going on here. Either you're not qualified to manage a Costco food court, or you believe in open borders. And I think it's the latter.
Senator Kennedy, your time has expired. Thank you.
I would just say the following two things. Number one, you're 0 for 2 on that. You're inaccurate in both respects, number one. And I'd like the record to reflect that 60 minutes is not 45 minutes, because I can't seem to answer a question without being interrupted. I just wanted to make that comment.
Well, if you would answer a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the recognition.
Thank you. Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing today. Gentlemen, welcome. Secretary Mayorkas, I'm going to turn my first question to you. I'm having my staff pass around page 51 from the August budget proposal that you put forward in the supplemental request. What I'd like to do is draw your attention to the language that's highlighted there in yellow. This is a breathtaking proposal that basically requests the authority for DHS to reprogram any amounts, all existing past, present, and future amounts of ICE funding, the ability to redirect that funding in its entirety, if that were your decision, to non-law enforcement activities. There's a litany of them listed there, including to non-governmental organizations. In essence, it would allow you to defund ICE to some extent, maybe to its entirety, and place those funds to other purposes. I looked for this same request in your October budget proposal, and I didn't find it. So, Mr. Secretary, are you still requesting this?
Senator, I have never proposed the defunding of ICE. I would vigorously...
Mr. Secretary, that's the exact... Please read this language that I handed to you here.
Senator, I would vigorously oppose the defunding of ICE, and please recall that I served for 12 years as a federal prosecutor, and I believe devoutly in the law enforcement mission of that agency.
I'm not asking you about your resume, Mr. Secretary. I'm asking you about the language that's plainly here in the page. This language asks for the authority, that we grant you the authority, DHS the authority to reprogram the funds that are intended for law enforcement at ICE, the authority to reprogram to the variety of things like non-governmental organizations, which are clearly not law enforcement. I mean, are you denying this would allow you the ability to reprogram even $1?
Oh, let me be clear, Senator, because it's I would want to read this carefully and in the context.
Well, I would hope you would have read it, because you're talking about an $8 billion budget here, and you're here to defend this budget right now.
Senator, let me be clear that there are different types of detention that work for different individuals to ensure their appearance in the immigration enforcement proceedings in which we place them. For example, there are individuals who pose a threat to public safety that need to be detained in a full custodial setting. There are individuals who do not pose a public safety threat, as to whom we have some level of assurance of their continued appearance in enforcement proceedings, and therefore we place them on alternatives to detention. There very well may be individuals that will continue to appear in their immigration enforcement proceedings if they are in a community-based residential center.
Well, here's what
For example,
this proposal, though, specifically asks about the budget for the only law enforcement agency that we have that is charged with the deportation of people that have come to this country illegally, many of them with criminal records. And what this asks for is the authority to reprogram that budget, to defund ICE and take those funds and use them for a variety of things, including giving them to non-governmental organizations. What it asks for, in essence, the way I read this, is to give ICE a different purpose. You have the ability to reprogram ICE and turn it into a travel agency that brings illegal immigrants here and sends them to hotels in New York City. You're going to turn this into an electromagnet if we were to allow you this authority.
that is completely false.
Then why is it requested in this manner, Mr. Secretary? Can you look at the language here and tell me that's not what you're requesting?
Senator, is it your assertion that when we contract out to an organization outside of the government to deliver greater efficiency?
My assertion is that you are asking for the ability to redirect, or reprogram is the technical term you use, to reprogram ICE funding to those sorts of purposes. That is a defunding of law enforcement. Placing those law enforcement funds, which we desperately need law enforcement,
Senator,
and putting them into custodial services or anything that might make it more convenient or more attractive to come to this country illegally.
Senator, so your assertion is that when we contract out, we are defunding the organization?
No, and I'd like to reclaim my time because I'm running out of it. This is not an assertion. This is a plain reading of the language here. You're asking for breathtaking authority to reprogram to defund ICE.
That is incorrect.
You're not backing away from this request. I'm not talking about the custodial services. I'm talking about your request to defund ICE up to the entirety of their budget. And I'm going to do everything I can to stop that from happening here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Coons.